we did have a little over 50 people sign up, and I guess, snowstorms and whatever, keeping people from here or whatever it might be. But thank you for joining us for the rest of the day here. Maybe take 5 minutes per group. Just to report out a little bit on what you talked about. Do we have a spokesperson from each group? And I think we do. And who wants to volunteer to go first? Of course. Who's sharing? Maybe Dong-Hoon, can you help hold this up maybe right here? And then you can, Jared, yeah, you can stand it on the table there so harm doesn't hurt. And there you go, thank you. Yeah, and maybe lean it up against the front there. There you go.
Do some Vanna White stuff. Okay, so we were responsible for looking at questions 5 through 8. We did a little bit of an unorthodox method because we wound up just talking and wound up kind of answering all the questions in some big circular fashion. So none of these answers are coming bullet pointed through each question, but more just how the conversation went, what we came up with, and what were the big things that we walked away from. So first and foremost, we talked about defining culture, and I think one of the first things we talked about was what we learned from the stuff today, and one of the big key pieces that kind of stuck was safety culture versus culture, and how they're essentially the same thing. They're not different. They're in the same exact phrase. They're the same thing. So we have to define culture, and we have to ensure that everyone knows that safety culture and culture itself are one and the same thing. One of the other things we talked about was how engineering students and safety students kind of go into academia, and they kind of look at each other differently and think that one is better than the other, and that can't exist either. They have to know that they're synergistic to themselves, and both pieces have to be there in order for there to be success. Safety needs to be in the accreditation. It's obviously there now, but it needs to be at the forefront of what's happening, which means that it's coming from the top down. There needs to be something there from the top going all the way down and ensuring that that's a value that's there. We have to align the definition and safety mindsets, so we have to give them actual terminology that you can actually look at and see. And we have to make what's visible, what's not visible, visible. A lot of times culture is not something you can walk in and just blatantly see at all points. So you have to be able to make that something that's visible to everybody. We have to give framework. So there was a lot of talk at our table about standardization, and you have to be, and that's not what you want. You want framework for people to see what's there and build it out, and not just be following a checklist, which kind of goes into how most engineers think. Most engineers think of quantitative things, linear thoughts, getting from point A to point B, and that's not what safety culture is. Safety culture is a giant line that does this, and it touches all these different things, and then eventually it might get to point B, but you can't have, hey, these are the rules, you just follow that rule and you're good. One of the things that was said was, you could probably go to any engineer and ask them, do you think you're unsafe? And they're going to say, no, I'm safe. It's built into the specs, and that's not necessarily what's there. We have to have a framework that creates conversation. So we have to establish a framework and actually have a good conversation about what's happening and encourage the conversation to happen. And you also have to teach things versus people. So we talked about someone following a rule, and hey, this is a rule and this is what we do, but when someone's turning their back and someone needs to get a job done, that personal thought will bleed in and they'll just do what they need to do to get it done. And you have to be able to see the difference between the thing that needs to be done and what the person's going to do. And you have to teach critical thinking. One of the things I brought up was fall protection. That's something that I see all the time where, hey, here's the standard for fall protection, but if you're not able to actually think past why it's there and what it means, you may be out of compliance just because, well, I have my SRL, I'm good to go. But guess what? It's not legal in that sense because of some compounding factor on the job. So you have to encourage critical thinking and emotional intelligence. As what was said at our table was a lot of times emotional intelligence is seen as a soft skill, but it's a hard skill. It's not something that comes normally to most people, and you have to be able to develop that hard skill of the soft skill, if you will. Development versus training. Again, you can train people, but you also have to develop them, and you have to have those checks and balances and see their growth throughout, and make it a process. It's not just a checkbox. You have to have practical applications. Again, you can make up whatever rules you want, and OSHA does that all the time, but you also have to make it so it's practical. You have to collaborate. So just like we just did at that table over there, we had 3 people from academia and 3 people from the field, and it took all of us having an active personal conversation to really come up with this list. And that's something that has to happen both sides of the field. It has to happen in academia, and it has to happen in the field, and where that pays off and how that builds. Stuff like this needs to happen frequently. We can't just do this once every 20 years and expect that, everything will be fine and dandy. We have to do this with regularity, and we have to encourage collaboration and people wanting to take part in things like this and other methods and research. We also have to have external feedback to the curriculum. It's really great to have curriculum built inside of an academia setting, but you also have to have people from the field, people that are looking at that and reviewing the curriculum, as well as the people that are involved in it. So that way you're getting both sides of the coin. And you have to review it with regularity. You can't just have it once every 5 years and expect that the curriculum that was 5 years ago is still current. I'm sure most of you know OSHA stuff changes every 6 months, it feels like. We have to also define expectations. So giving people in the field and in school expectations of what they should be doing and who's responsible for what. And we also have to strive for continuous improvement. What's next? What's the next thing we're working on? Just because we check a box off, what are we focusing on in the next phase?
Thank you. And is that a heart there? A heart. Yeah. You got to have heart, right? Yeah. And I see the wording is tending towards the heart, right? Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. All right. I appreciate it. Group number 2, or whoever wants to join in next. Who's the second best group? All right. There you go. Thank you. Did you have a flip chart? No. Yeah, you can take a break. Great, thank you. All right, the last group, the last best group. Who, Alden. I think Alden, you got voted in. Yeah, I heard the vote. Yeah. Oh, okay. Maybe everybody turns their head upside down. There you go. Thank you.
Our questions were. Yeah, we
Oh,
started.
well, this group was just backwards
Yeah,
and upside down.
Yeah, we started with question 5. And it was, so how can higher education help with the promotion of safety culture? We talked about a bunch of different things. We first said that it really needs to be intentional, and whether that be a required class or internships or a mentor, but have that really be intentional in the higher education classes. And then personally, or individually, leadership led by example. So instilling that to the students is important. And then providing incentives, some sort of extra credit, just like we would in the safety arena where we try to incentivize people to do the right thing. And then communicate the differences between the tradespeople and the classroom. We talked about how the craft workers have a different approach probably than the people coming from academia or with a recently minted degree. So the approach is going to be different, and just ways to emphasize that. And then obviously look for ways to introduce safety outside of the construction. Look for other majors outside of construction majors, so not just in construction or civil. And then we recognize that obviously there's a lot of work being done in prevention through design, and so developing other ways to integrate that and maybe move that into other fields would be useful. And then lastly here, take advantage of guest speakers and field trip opportunities. So looking for industry resources, again, to integrate the students into field, or even having video where they could go through a case study type scenario. And then one last little practical one was to do a risk analysis as part of the lab. I think the labs are probably easy pickings to do a JHA, JSA while you're doing that. So, all right, question 6, what are the industry needs? We talked just generally about, I don't think they're construction specific, but just in general, like communication is really important, and leadership skills are always important. But obviously technical skills, they need to have a blend of all three. It can't just be singular. And then integrating culture of the safety between the general contractor and the subs. So we talked a bit about second and third tier subs and how that is really can be good and bad depending on the general contractor and how that gets down a ways. And then also the size of the project and how that can make a change and a difference. And one of the suggestions was to do more mentoring between experienced folks in the field and those who are new, and recognizing that there are a lot of retirements coming, the aging workforce, and a way to join them together would be important. So, okay, I think the next question is next. Question is, how big is the issue of safety culture in the construction industry? And we gave it 100. No, we did. We just talked around it a bit, not a whole lot of notes. But we recognize, again, that the project size can be a big driver of the culture of the project and the company. And without safety, performance will be poor,
And so it has to be part of the integrated business plan. So you need to think about safety from the beginning of the project and all the way through. And bigger selection criteria. I'm not sure what that was referring to. I don't know if you remember. Oh. Yes, yes. Just step back to the metrics of your ER mod and yeah, TRIR.
A lot of contract selections years ago, it's become bigger and bigger in selection factor. You know, if certain metrics were below a threshold, you were just not considered for award. So, I mean, it goes right back to being awarded the contract at the beginning.
Yeah. Anything else to add on that one? Okay. Last question. How does industry value incorporating safety culture concepts in undergraduate education? We made it hard on you. Sorry. So we talked again about students needing exposure to a lot of different companies in order to not just develop their own or see other companies with their safety cultures, but to develop their own personal safety culture and how important it is for, we think in education, to instill that into the individual so that they can have a good choice in the company that they choose to work for. And then develop the mindset of safety so that it's second nature. So it's just a part of their business. So it's not a, oh yeah, let's not forget about safety, but how is it integrating into everything? Similar to the risk analysis, similar to prevention through design. And then leadership culture starts in schools. So we talked about if the trajectory of a graduated student is likely to be a supervisor, is likely to be a leader, is likely to be an owner, then the leadership needs to start at the schools and needs to start, you know, before they're probably ready. But similar to other things where you may not remember your BIM modeling, but until you end up using it, this leadership, if it's, you know, at least talked about at some level, it'll be used, relied upon later on. And I'll leave it. And I forget anything here in our group? Okay.
Great job, Alden. They voted on the right guy. Yeah, and thank you, Dong Hyun. Appreciate it. We have time here before the snacks and drinks come. I just want to open it up to the floor. Anything else that you want to share, and then Ed's going to kind of come up and talk about closing remarks. Any other discussion? Yeah. Great idea. And you know, one way I thought about that just now is if you look back at your schooling and you think about what sparked you in a certain way, what was that spark that said, I want to do that, or I really enjoy that, and you get it early. If we were to create that spark early, what was it that grabbed your attention? Was it a person, a thing, a field trip, a competition? What was it for any of you that if we were to try to do that early would make a difference? Any ideas? Anything that comes to mind? It's the professors always, right? I'm just kidding. literally for you, Ed, it was a professor. It was a spark. And that person changed your life and you said, I want to do that. I believe in it. I'm going to do it. So maybe it's the people. Yeah, Jack.
So I chased a degree in engineering because I thought engineers change the world. And I believe it, you know, and when I went out there and started working in the world, you know, change became part of my mindset. How do I help the organizations in Europe?
Yeah. How do you build a better world? Okay, so you got that spark from somewhere. You heard about engineering from a teacher. Okay, so is it a lot about the people? And maybe we educate the people or train them, give them that framework about how to instill creativity, imagination, all those things in our students within this context of safety, right? Is that kind of what we're looking for? Or what else creates that spark? Okay. Yeah. You were going to do it. Sure. So go down into the freshman year. Start really early. I know, one second, Gary, I know when I see, have you heard of the concrete canoe competition? Yeah. You know, that generates so much interest from student groups. They really get into it. Building a concrete canoe and then go competing against other universities and hoping you don't capsize while you're in your canoe, or the steel bridge competition or something like that. But giving them something that they can be creative, they can think about it within the context of their discipline, and then if it's a competition, great. If it's somewhere else, some other way to really energize them. And so maybe if there's something the industry could create around safety, not necessarily just do you know the standards, right? That's pretty boring. But something where they have to create a new whatever it might be. 1 second, Billy. Gary had a comment.
I remember when it was early in my career, you know, it's very easy to see the safety department against operations being kind of adversarial, or at least maybe not adversarial so much to the policemen, you know, are the safety folks. And it's been meaningful to me to see early on. I had a safety group that did an award to one of the ops guys. You know, so you knew sometimes these things are hard to measure. It's certainly a metric if you see a safety guys rewarding, one of the operation guys for
Yeah.
the work that he's doing and how he's doing it. That was pretty neat.
A safety award maybe for our students in some way or something like that. You were going to have a suggestion.
Yeah, I was gonna answer your first question, but in a way that was my experience. I learned early that workers in the field, construction workers, or any kind of frontline worker, is at the sharp end of the stick of construction, design and construction. Meaning, by the time you get to, there's workers on site and they're physically on tools, about 90% upstream lives the opportunity to make a difference for that person, whether it's through design or plan. And the closer you get to actually having boots on the ground, now you can only shift what happens right here. And they're subjected to all the things you did upstream and what an impact you could make if you started working upstream, which is why in my career I started going to leadership or youth management to help them understand. When you sit in a room and you're doing the design here, if this little switch is going to impact where that person is, go up there and go down there. And that was a big aha. But it also led to a bigger perspective that in engineering or architecture or any kind of school that builds things, incredible things, you have the ability to impact people for generations, decades, as long as what you build is still there. It affect the people that built it, affect the people who operate it, or live in it, or work in it, and as long as the community can look at it. So that's a big pull. But regarding safety, I've seen where you can just, if you go this scenario, that person at the sharp end of the stick is going to die, or you can create something up here that has that be an incredible experience, and you have the control to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I have a presentation that I give on prevention through design. And in that presentation, I have a slide that says, design is a powerful ability. It's very powerful. And obviously we've designed and built many great things across the country and across the world, dams and bridges and so forth. And then the next slide is, good design demands attention, where just like you're saying, if we don't think about it, we could create something that really makes that person at the sharp end of the stick struggle. And we've seen those designs in all of our projects where you think, wow, what was somebody thinking here with that? Why didn't they design it another way? And it starts with the design.
And the inverse is possible, which is the answer that I was thinking to your question is, imagine what you could do to make people's lives, like make a job that's generally really hard, really easy. I could employ so many people to make those carpenters who retire at the age of 60 and usually die by 65 because of like, this is hard to do so much easier.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to follow up on that, if I may, Nicholas and I had a discussion the other day. We were talking about prevention through design and where the hazards are assessed, identified and assessed, and it's during design. Maybe if we can convince the architects and engineers saying, you are at the front end of the stick, right? And you can affect the people at the sharp end. If you take this concept of, hey, I can contribute by doing this, whatever it might be. And I think that's one of the things that we can get into our engineering classes. That would help. What else? I'm stalling here until the food comes. Ed, you want to go? We got to live up more for Ed here.
Yeah, I'm gonna get up there because I've got a bunch of notes.
Okay.
I wanna fumble everything, but I see the food out there, so I'll be watching that as we go. So I wanted to wrap things up, and I know I'm way up here, but that's okay. And I guess the first is to say thank you to a lot of people as well. Again, I want to give a special thanks to John and his students and his staff who put this together. Let's give them a great hand. It's been a really nice venue, really nice, very smooth the way this has worked. So thank you very much for volunteering to do this, and I've enjoyed working with you. Also, the National Academy of Engineering. What we're trying to do with this set of
symposia is extend that into something that's sponsored perhaps one time by the National Academy of Engineering, and then get them to use what we've learned along with what they're going to learn and put that out for the engineering community so that eventually we can impact the accreditation requirements. I think that's where it is. I mean, I don't know whether there are 27 different engineering types of programs that are accredited through ABET, and only about 10 to 15% of them have even mentioned safety. For instance, aerospace engineering curriculum accreditation requirements doesn't mention safety, which is kind of interesting when you think about what aerospace engineering does and so on and so forth. So we're hoping that eventually this leads to a little more cognizance from our accreditation requirements that way. So NAE is a very important partner with us, and I wanted to acknowledge that. I do want to acknowledge our sponsors who've given money. Again, John went through them in a little bit of detail this morning, which is great. You can see the names of the companies listed there. They've been very, very good for us, and many people from these organizations have also participated and will be participating in future seminars. So you can kind of see that there's a lot of interest in this time around. And of course, we have 5 different universities sponsoring this year, so the universities are stepping up as well. And so that's really gratifying. So I took 15 pages of notes. I mean, of course, they're small pages. And I wanted to summarize some of the things that we heard today. And I really appreciate the breakouts and some of the, this is going to be a little bit of the same thing, but I think a few different insights that I'm going to provide to you right now. And part of that is because I've been to a number of these and I hear some things differently sometimes as we go through it. So I think I would start out with David Drinkward's discussion this morning. I thought it was an excellent presentation. And the things that kind of popped out to me, I think, first of all, is they're people-centered. And we heard that with culture and all that kind of stuff, and their whole life view of safety. And I probably will butcher this, but it's the physical side, the health and well-being side, and the psychological side. And I think that's a really good way to think about this. It's all about people. We're a people industry. And I think their approach is really, really good. I like their little acronym, the GUTS, get us there safe. Most organizations have something like that, and it kind of is a way of saying safe is important in our organization. I've done a lot of work with, for instance, SUNT, and many of you have heard about their sticky program. I'll do the G-rated version, stuff that can kill you are sticky, and it's all about looking at high energy situations and getting the craft involved and making sure the day's safe. Others are, we want everyone to go home tonight the same way they started. I mean, just stuff like that where there's part of the culture, part of the way people look at things. I really liked his 2 dangerous myths this morning, David's, what he talked about. I think number 1 is in our industry, you can't put people first. That's a myth. And number 2 is safety, quality, cost, and schedule are competing priorities. And what I've seen in all of these seminars, when you talk to people who are actually incredibly successful from a safety perspective, they will tell you it pays back. And in fact, it becomes a competitive advantage for them. And so I think that was really kind of cool. I liked his guts room and tough enough to talk thing. And as many people who come and give these presentations, there was a very important moment when they decided to push that. And in that case, it was a death by suicide. In others, it's a terrible injury. In some, it's a financial crisis where they can't get work because they aren't safe. And so you see those things happen in companies that have taken on these things and become world-class as they move forward. I thought the 2 things he left us with, David left us with, where do you start? Put people first, look for the better way, and speak up. And I thought that was pretty good. And then what about leaders? You have to have humility. You have to accept ideas from everywhere. You have to walk the talk, and you have to care about people. So I thought that was an excellent presentation this morning, and we heard some of this in our breakouts this afternoon. I thought, moving on to our panel, I thought it was an excellent panel of industry folk. And just to kind of hit some highlights, I mean, culture came up continuously in there. Leadership came up continuously in our panel discussions. Relationships and values, again, it's all about people, but we have to have relationships. I've heard that in our other seminars or symposia where it's like, if you've got a young engineer, get them in the field and they have to talk to the trades because they have to understand and build empathy. And plus, the trades know more than they do in a lot of cases in certain parts of our industry. I heard that safety is a journey, and I think that's the case. It does not happen overnight. And that's really kind of the way we're doing these symposia, I think, is our journey with NAC kind of pushing this, but also many of you, where there is a place where we can get to a point where we don't kill as many people. And I think that's something that all of us, I have a passion for that. It was interesting to hear about what our panelists were looking for in new hires. I heard curiousness, a fit with our values, care, authenticity, new ideas, enthusiasm, questioning, courage. Hard to get all that in an interview, but sometimes you can get snippets of it with the right questions. There was a discussion of the technical versus the cultural, and I think the answer is you have to have both. You have to have training for safety and, tools and techniques. We talk about that a lot of times, but that also has to go hand in hand with culture. Because somebody mentioned it a few moments ago, if people don't buy into this, as soon as you walk out the door, they're going to do it the wrong way. Even if they know, because they're under a time crunch, and sometimes they just are, careless. So we have to look at that. I think Jack said something about, we have to have systems and culture and all that, but we also have to have management systems and controls. And we'd like to get to where it's not just a priority, but it's a value. Everybody looks at work and safety as a value within the corporation. And then I think I've hit a lot of these. I think looking at university programs, we need to university programs need to talk about safety. They need to look at it as a strategic planning initiative, similar to programs on sustainability. Look at the mental health side, the hazard identification side, make people aware of what's going on in the industry in terms of suicide and overdoses, because our students, when they graduate, they're immediately into that environment. And hopefully, if they've had internships, they've also been exposed to that environment. And we want them to go out and be successful and have positive impacts. Let's see. I thought it was really interesting with our associate dean. I spent 34 years in academia, so I could relate to a lot of things that he was saying. I thought that, we want our students to succeed and graduate. At ASU, our goal was 90%. We pretty much met it. We want to take care of our students in the freshman year and throughout so that they can graduate. But we also want them to be ready to address global socio-technical challenges, and part of that is safety. And so if we're truly saying that, we're going to do things to get them ready. I thought some of the ideas about helping academia address that, I hadn't really thought about. First of all, trying to get it in the promotion and tenure process, safety. I don't know if that would ever happen, having been through that a lot, but that is an interesting idea. I think more importantly, making it personal and making it personal for the students. Students look up to faculty, and they look up to industry as mentors. And so if you portray that this is the way it should be and this is what we're doing, many of them buy into that very quickly. And I think that's important to remember. And I like the idea someone mentioned earlier about the freshman year. I think freshman year is very, very important in getting people to have that mindset because they're looking for their career and what they're going to do, I think. Then I think the whole discussion around the e-campus was something that we haven't talked about before at any of these symposia, and I was very involved in e-campus or our extended programs where we do it all online. And I had thought about and talked about safety in that regard. You have to be very intentional because it's just can slip through the cracks. And I think it's something to really think through in terms of those programs. If we're going to do those programs, they need to be just like the other part of our program, and they need to have that safety component. And I think that's something that's difficult. I did want to just talk real quickly about artificial intelligence. We had a speaker a couple of weeks ago at USC and talk about artificial intelligence and safety. And, you know, he's from Oracle. And I think artificial intelligence is going to be a helper. It's not going to ever replace a lot of the human stuff. But if we can have agents working in the background, just evaluating, I think they were looking at 250 variables. Many of them had nothing to do with safety, like size of payroll, what the work tasks were that they were performing, you know, the performance on the budget, all those kind of things, and analyzing that weekly and giving advice on where you should put your effort in terms of safety. I think that's one way that AI will help us in the safety arena. But even if you're told this is where you need to put your research sources and focus, it's still going to take people to do it. So AI is just a helper in that regard. So I think the whole issue, you know, as with any academic program that I've ever been around, you have to make it easy. You have to provide resources, and you have to work within the system that you have. And I think on campuses, we all have EH&S systems, and so they can be a big help, and I used that when I was running the program at ASU. We got them very involved with our students and student groups and did that. The panel this afternoon with higher education, you know, I think that a few things popped out, and a lot of these were similar ideas to what we had heard before. Certainly we can have safety degrees. That's not easy, but some people are doing that. For instance, Virginia Tech has a new construction safety degree that they're coming out with this year. Certainly certificates and minors within programs. I like the idea, someone mentioned certificates and how you can actually, you know, get those in place. And many of today's students love to have certificates and different kinds of things behind their name and put on a resume. And so we always did a OSHA 30 at ASU. That was one of the things that we did. And the students found that that was a value in industry. And so there are other things that could be, that we could put together that really can help in that regard. I thought the discussion around the flight program was really interesting. Yeah, there's a consequence on that if you're not safe. You know, it's a shame we don't focus like that in other programs, you know, when you really think about it. And I think that's something that was kind of interesting to me. You know, some of the ideas that we've heard before, but I think are really critical here, is that many of our faculty have no real-world experience. I hate to say that, but that's just the way it is. And so giving them the ability to do faculty internships, I think that's something that industry can provide. Or even if it's just a short time so that they get to feel what it's all about. Certainly internship programs for college students I think are essential in today's world. Because in 120 hours that we have in academia, we can't teach them everything. And internships pay for themselves over and over. The students are better when they come back into class, first of all. They actually understand what we're talking about. And so internships are really critically important, I think. And certainly guest speakers can help because that exposes faculty to practice and so on and so forth. I like the thing that Joe said, any class that has means and methods in it, the design classes, materials classes, and so on. I think that it should be and could be and is fairly easy to incorporate some safety aspects in those classes. And actually enhances the learning when you do that. And I think that's really where it becomes an integrated part of the curriculum. There was a discussion around lean and modularization, both of those topics today, and certainly lean is a method for planning construction tasks and activities. And if you're doing that, then you also look at how safe the task and opportunity is going to be. And so it's certainly something that I think has some value. Modularization, that's the way our industry's going. And we can do modules where we can keep workers out of harm's way. And I think that's one of the areas that really has a place for us. I'm almost finished, by the way. I think one of the key points that came out of that panel was exposure, and exposure of our students to different things. It should be an all-encompassing strategy. And we've heard this in several of our symposia. Internships, site visits, whether they're in person or virtual. Safety lab, I like what you're doing, maker spaces or builder spaces. Getting OSHA training to our students while they're in college, whether it's a class or we bring trainers in and subsidize it for our students, but we give them the opportunity to get OSHA 10 or OSHA 30 cards before they leave. At ASU, we actually required in our construction program, we required all of our students to get an OSHA 30 card before they finished their sophomore year because we required 2 internships. And I basically told the director of the program, or program chair, I don't want my students out on construction sites unless they have some OSHA training. And, at least a little bit, because I feel responsible for them. And so we did that. I think somebody mentioned a safety inspection assignment. I thought that was a really neat idea. I actually required students to come up with a safety moment and give it in front of the class, every class. So it was a student, not me, doing a safety moment, which again, the students have to go out and do a little bit of research and understand things. And sometimes they did a lot better job than I did anyway. So that was a good assignment. And I think that trying to figure out how to do all those things in an e-curriculum is not easy. And so how can we get the students exposed beyond just the classroom? And I think that's where this has to go. Somebody asked the question, I think it was Doug, how do we measure safety education? And I would say that in our program at ASU, we had a very active industry advisory board, and they were not shy about telling us where our students were not prepared. And so they would come in and say, your students are too arrogant. Or they would come in and say, they don't have enough exposure to BIM. Or they would come in and say, we need you to teach them safety better. And so getting some feedback from your industry advisory board, because they've hired your graduates, that's one place to get that feedback pretty quickly. So if you have an active IAB, then you can get that. I think some other things, when we documented this from an accreditation perspective, we had testing and test questions that we showed. We had assignments that students gave, how it works in accreditation. You have to show them the best in something medium and something that's bad, but at least you have the assignments and it's making students think. Industry surveys, we did those after the fact, and, you know, usually students don't answer 3 years later, maybe longer than that. I think self-assessments when they leave, we got a lot of value out of self-assessments. We required all of our students to do them before we signed off on them graduating. I mean, that's one way to get them to do it. And most of them were if they had a bone to pick, they would give it to us, and then they also told us how they thought things went. Of course, that's their perspective, but with internships, they probably had a better perspective than most students. And then I think, you know, that certification thing from ASCE might be one thing we could try to push so that people can get some kind of a university certification, maybe nationally or whatever. I hadn't heard that idea. I think that's a great one. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Path Forward. I'm almost done. I've got one slide left, and I think Path Forward from us at NAC and the people that we're working with, I think one is we're going to compile all of the stuff that we're doing this spring, and we'll probably combine it with all the stuff we did a couple of years ago, and we're going to develop a proceedings. So we'll contact you and you can get the proceedings. There already is a proceeding that you can download from 2 years ago. We're going to continue to push for the accreditation thing, but when we started this, we knew accreditation changes are decades-long efforts, and so we wanted to do something faster than decades-long. And I think if we have the background and the ability to impact people because we've done a lot of this groundwork, then I think we have a better chance of getting accreditation standards changed. At NAC, we're actually working on a series of case studies. It's kind of coming slow, but we're going to have some case studies. Everything that we do is offered for free, and so just kind of keep looking at us, and we'll publicize these. And you know, what we'd like to do is these are very easy to incorporate into an existing class. That's what we're working on. We also have over 50 safety moments that we're working on. We're starting that pretty slow, but we'll be publishing about, right now it's about 55 safety moments that are construction focused in the same format. So you'll be able to go in there and pick the ones that you think might be useful for your particular situation. And then finally, I think what you can do is hopefully you've taken a few good ideas today with you. Please, if you're a faculty, take our recommendations, the things that we've talked about, things that you've heard, and work to implement something on a small basis. Everything starts small, but you can start implementing things. I know in the program, we've had several faculty with the last set of seminars 2 years ago who've implemented certificates and minors, and in one case, an entire program. And so, but many others have just incorporated some of the things that we're talking about in their classes. So take what we did and move forward with that. I think the other piece is on the industry side. You've heard a lot today. I think there are barriers. Academic programs need help. And so pick a couple of universities that you recruit from and value the students from those programs and work with them to improve their programs, a few at a time. And I think that's really kind of where we can make a big difference. So volunteer your help to give them improvement ideas around the whole idea of safety culture and safety systems. So that's really, and I think the industry advisory boards I mentioned earlier, that's one place to reach out to if you're academics, and partnerships are important. So that's really all I have. Hopefully that gives a good overview. And what I want to do is say thank you very much for sticking around with us and participating today. And John, I see the food is ready. So good timing. So thank you. Yep, safe travels.